Hey, thanks so much for being here. We're really happy to have you guys here, standing room only. It's awesome. So we want to tell you about our science project, which was creating a digital comic reading experience using WPF. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about us. So Nathan and I met each other originally while we were working at Microsoft, and we were actually both part of the WPF team, where I worked on controls and control templating, and Nathan had the job that I secretly wanted, which was on the demo team where he got to put together cool stuff. So Nathan's job was basically to take the stuff we were building and then make stuff to show off at conferences like this. In fact, many of the coolest WPF demos that you've seen are probably Nathan's work. Well, not long after that, Nathan left Microsoft, and he went and he took a job with a firm called Identity Mine. And I realized that now I actually could have his job. And so I left Microsoft as well, and I went down to work for Identity Mine too. Now, Identity Mine is a great company, and we're both really, really happy there. The thing that is great about Identity Mine is we get to do a little bit of both the things we love. So on the one hand, we're fairly technical. We're a dev shop. In fact, our roots are in hardcore dev. On the other hand, though, we are a design shop. And what we found, in fact, is that the magic experiences, the things that people really tend to fall in love with, are the software experiences that take advantage of both of those skills. And so that is our mantra. That's what we're trying to do, is create software that people love. Check out loveyoursoftware.com if you want more information about that. So with that, let me set the stage a little bit for the comic reader. Actually, could I just have you hit the space bar? I like to be out here where I can see everybody. So this has been a big year for WPF. It was exactly 1 year ago that we were at MIX talking about WPF, and at that time it was fairly new technology, and we were all kind of becoming acquainted with it. But in the last year, WPF has grown up. And not only that, but today I think we're all pretty excited because WPF has a little brother, Silverlight. And Silverlight's actually really cool. In fact, I can't wait to start doing more. Go ahead. And also Blend has since been shipped. And the reason I said a really cool girlfriend is because nothing makes you look cooler than a really cool girlfriend, and Blend is the same way for WPF. So now people are starting to create some really, really exciting and cool applications. In addition to that, it was exactly 1 year ago when we launched the first WPF reading experience, and that was the New York Times app. How many of you have used that before? Probably many of us, right? Since then, a number of others have also followed, though. And at Identity Mine, we had a chance to work on a number of those. So we built a reading experience for the Seattle PI. We also built a reading experience for Forbes. And I think both of those are freely available. So especially if you're from Seattle, I actually read my news on the Seattle PI. We don't get a newspaper anymore. We didn't get one before either, so I guess anymore is misleading. But now I'm reading it. That's what changed. Go ahead. Comics, 2006, 2007 was also a big year, for me personally at least, in terms of comics. So, here, I'll get that one. So, is Phil here? Phil Fortes? Yay! So Phil gave me, I think, or loaned me, not sure, need to clarify. Yeah. His copy of an awesome book called Understanding Comics. And I read it, and honestly, I've got a new perspective on well, life, maybe not, but a new perspective on art and communication because of this book, and I would highly recommend it. In fact, I've got a friend who's a high school English teacher, and I got him to make it part of his curriculum. We'll see how that goes. But I think it's a really powerful book. So I read that, and then around that same time, we were working on the New York Times reader, and Nick Thusen, is Nick here? Can't really see because of the lights.
In the front row here.
Oh, sweet. Nick's right here, Mr. New York Times reader himself. He was getting into this sort of I guess, lesser-known world of digital comic book reading. And at the time, we were working on the New York Times reader, and he thought, I think we could do a much better job if we took some of these ideas that we had for the New York Times reader and applied them to comic reading. And he actually built this killer prototype of a comic reader, and that really definitely serves as the basis for what we ended up creating here. So with that in mind, Nathan and I, Nathan and I are both comic book readers, fans when we were kids. Nick's thing had a big impact on us, and ever since we saw that, we've kind of tossed around ideas about what would be like the perfect comic book reading experience in WPF. And so at some point, we started kicking this idea around at Identity Mine, and as you'll see, Identity Mine is a great place to work because they were all over it. And before we knew it, we had meetings with DC Comics, with IDW Comics. We were trying to pitch this idea to people, get people interested. And in fairness, it is a science project, right? So people were somewhat skeptical, but we talked to IDW, and they were actually really excited about the idea. And they saw that the potential for having a digital comic book reading experience was out there. And so as you'll see later on, in fact, they even loaned us some of the content. They do the 24, the TV series. They do the comic for 24. So they loaned us content from the 24 series, which you'll see in a second. It's really stunning. With that,
just hand it over.
Hand it over to Nate.
All right. So let me jump in on my slides here. Mine are not nearly as beautiful as Robbie. This is one of the things I'm glad he's got my job now. So when we talk to people, and this is mostly, a lot of this comes from personal experience and talking to people and getting kind of like, what are the requirements, what are the things that people feel like are the necessary major hurdles that you want to hit. Basically, the thing I heard the most was, we don't think you can do it. We don't think there can be an experience that can actually replace the print experience. And I think we've all actually said that ourselves. We've picked up different reader experiences and said, yeah, this is cool, I would use this, and then we've kind of put them on the back burner and not used them. I think there's a lot of us, and I mean, a bunch of us in the room here really, really, truly do believe that there is a digital reading experience that, one, can actually meet the experience in a way that we would continue to meet the print experience in a way that we would actually replace it, not replace it, but use it, extend it, and then obviously we already know that there's a rich connected experience that already surpasses what we do with print. So there's these what I call like these momentary sparks of excitement where you're just like, this is the life-changing. Like, I can't wait till my world is this way. I mean, to me, I pick up Times Reader, I read my content, and I'm going to talk about some aha moments I have with the Time Reader in a second here. But so, we talked to some of the comic book people, and I remember one of the things that they said was, I just don't think, they're very passionate about their art. They're really passionate to the point that they really care what the paper is. You see the quality. How many people actually are comic book readers here? I'm assuming there's a lot. Okay, I actually was the one thing I fear about this talk. It's kind of like comic book readers. You guys are all passionate about this too, probably, to the point where it's kind of like going to a Trekkie convention and arguing about what color Spock's blood is. You never know if you're gonna totally get hung by like supposing some things about it, but. They really, really care about how good the quality of that art is conveyed. And they just, when we said we can really make this beautiful experience, they said, yeah, I'll believe it when we see it. So that's what this became the science experiment, because we wanted to create something that we could actually show off. Like I said, comics in art form, and one of the biggest hurdles is that artists really don't like this. They really, right now, this is one of the experiences that you get online. There's some reading experiences for comics online right now. Pretty decent reading experiences. Other than the fact, the one thing that I would, attest to, my biggest complaint is, it's beautiful art, and I'm getting pixelated art. I really don't like it when the text gets mangled either. The readability is such an important piece. So, what I've done is I've broken myself into what I thought were the major problems, and so when we started coming up with the requirements of the design elements, what we actually focused on in the reader prototype that I'm going to show in a second here, was the reading problem and the content problem. So the reading problem basically bases around that reading on a computer is uncomfortable, and I know I've had this argument. People who've gotten me on the subject of readers, unfortunately, I've talked their ears off, but the readers are, people pick them up, they're like, yeah, this is a cool experiment, but it's not as life-changing as I thought it would be. And most of those people, I'm like, did you actually try it on a device? Did you try it on something that was a comfortable reading experience? Nick is actually holding up has a couple devices here. He's got a Fujitsu Lifebook, and it's this little tiny device, so it's a tablet PC. Do you have your OQO? It's when you try the New York Times, Seattle PI, Forbes on these little devices that you realize, wow, this is where it actually starts to fit my life needs. I had this, for me, the aha moment was when we were working on the Times Reader. And here's the Okio. This is a device that's actually running Vista. It's that big. And yep.
Have you run the Times Reader on that, Nick?
Yeah.
How does it work?
Yeah.
Pretty good. See? There you have it.
So is Kevin Jerstead in the room at all?
He's outside.
He's outside. So I don't know if Kevin coined this term, but this was the term that I've heard him evangelize more than anybody. He calls it Twitch reading. And this is, when we were developing the Times Reader, this was one of these projects where when you build these reader projects, you read the news way more than you thought you would. You learn, I remember when we were doing some different data sources, I was like, I knew more about Britney Spears than I've ever known about. But I'd go home every night with whatever build of the reader we had, and I'd test it out. I'm calling it my nightstand test. Basically, the nightstand test was, would it be as comfortable as a book sitting on my nightstand when I could just pick that thing up and start reading when I want to, get right back to where I left off? And right now, you grab your laptop, you set it on your lap, it burns your legs. You wait for it to start up, you get the app going, and then you find out you're not connected or something like that. It's just, there's so many barriers to a good, comfortable reading experience. So that's like, to me, one of the key crucial things to defining whether it's comfortable. And there's one thing that defines comfortable too is how it actually displays on the device. So, with web experiences, we've always had this one fixed size to compensate for the lowest common denominator. And part of the reader experience is to make up for that and template or do adaptive layout according to the size of the device. And so that's something we were going to try to do with the reader. So one of my biggest complaints, and probably what I try to do with every time when I think about what pieces are in my design or for user interface, is I'm a minimalist. I like to break things down to there's nothing on the screen. But when something is called a reader, it needs to do that good. It doesn't need to have all the other bells and whistles overriding the experience. When you open up an article, the one thing you need to know how to do is get started reading. And pretty much the only interaction you want initially is how to turn the page. If you can't figure that out, we're gonna kind of dance around that when I show the app in a second here. But that to me is the core of it. One, the UI shouldn't actually impede the content, and the UI should be just intuitive. This is something that I'm borrowing this concept from Scott McCloud, who knows, how innovative. I mean, I've only heard it from him. But for me, reading on a computer is just completely distracting. You have a window up, you have sidebar gadgets, you have, Messenger toast popping up all over the place, email toast. You've got UI that is just loud and obtrusive, buttons everywhere. Trying to get into a reader experience when you're used to picking up a book and just seeing the content and reading that content, trying to get it onto a digital experience, the thing you have to do is demote the UI. You have to get and promote the content. Content's the most important thing.
That's especially true. Well, I don't know if it's especially true, but also with comics where it's an art, you really want, visually to be able to focus in on that. And that's one of the reasons you'll see we chose black as our background color. We wanted the content to really pop.
Scott McCloud calls this the contract between the author and the reader. And when you're telling a story, this is just common thing in film and in print and anywhere you're doing storytelling. It's the creator's job to create that contract between between them and the reader, to start communicating and to immerse that person in that world so they can experience that content. That's why it's really important to create experiences that allow you to do that, and that's one of the complexities. So for a high fidelity experience, I broke down the key important pieces that I totally hammered on Robbie, and I think we all agreed on these things. Speed, I'm going to pick on a product that I'm very glad I have, but have to complain about. I bought the entire Amazing Spider-Man set. There's a company that produces that, and they produce it in PDF. It's really cool. I've got all of them on a bunch of CDs. But it's just a really, really cumbersome experience. And I actually quit reading them because it took too much time to use them. And I wanted to have something that was, kind of goes back to that core when I talk about twitch reading, which is just using one finger and twitching to make that movement so that I can step out and not be actually thinking about my interaction anymore and just be consuming the content. Fidelity, that just goes back to the point of you want to convey what the artist intended to convey, and you don't want to have any piece of the user interface or the technical limitations actually getting in the way of the content. So you don't want to have to say, well, just because we can't ship, it's a web-connected experience and we don't have the bandwidth to send high-res bitmaps over the pipe. Something that we did in the Times Reader projects is it's a sync model. And so when you're synchronizing that data, you can package up more data, and it's an offline experience. So you can actually package up a higher fidelity content and let that be a client experience. And again, simplicity is just key. And so when I'm going to jump out into the app experience, how do we switch over, Robbie?
That's D.
D?
Yep.
Just click the button. All right. So we got two little icons here, create and read. Robbie's going to talk about creator in just a second here. But I'm going to start reading, and I start my app up. It's going to ask me what comic I want to open up. Like we talked about before, we had IDW get us the rights from Fox to use the 24 comic books. This is just, we wanted beautiful content. It's kind of to start developing this experience. First thing you see is there's barely any UI on the screen. That's where I said I was going to dance around, because I've got a lot more vision. We've been just cramming to get this stuff in. We've got a lot of stuff we got in here.
Oh, yeah, I didn't mention this. We talked about this for a long time. We've probably been talking about this for months.
Yeah.
We built this in about 2 weeks. And even that is, how normally people say we build this in 2 weeks, and it means like 2 weeks plus the 4 months of prep work. We really started 2 weeks ago. So this has been a quick and fast-driven effort. So there'll be a lot of "we wish this would" in the conversation.
So I'm going to kind of explain what my experience, what I want to actually have happen here. You start the comic up. You want to advance the page. You would either hit the space bar, hit a down arrow, hit a right arrow. That advances the page. The user knows how to read a comic, and that's pretty much going to satisfy what you would think you want to do. We have this concept down at the bottom of being able to get to the index of our pages. So if I click on a page, we'll actually navigate to that page. I'm going to navigate back to the beginning of our content here. So when I talked about the complexity of making sure that you have the best experience that actually conveys the artist's intent, one of the problems is when you're using that OQO device, a comic book is just unreadable. There's no way you could be able to read that comic book. One of the things that's really nice is, if you take this comic book, we built in a single-page view and a two-page view. So I'm going to switch to a page here and click, UI bug. So here's our two-page view. And we can go back and forth between this. This is great when you're on a tablet PC and you do the orientation switch. On a two-page looks really good on a horizontal orientation, and on a vertical orientation, one page looks better. But on a small device, we needed to have some kind of model for being able to experience this. And so we have this panel view. None of these, like I said, there's other experiences out there. There's no innovation in this panel view concept. What I think the cool thing is that we're actually taking advantage of WPF in a way that the content actually can, the speed and the fidelity of the content isn't sacrificed. So if I start navigating through the content with panel view on, you see we start zooming in on the content. This content, we're actually running this. When we've been testing this, we've been running this at the full resolution of these laptops that we're using, and it's like 1680 by 1050. So we're running at a really high resolution. It was a really difficult problem to solve. Do you want to talk about some of the complexities?
Yeah. So dealing with the images, some of the images that we're looking at are I think these images we scanned at, or we actually got them from IDW, but they're 2,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels wide. So they're massive images. They're about just over a megabyte each. And as you can see, there's like 25 pages in a comic book, right? So there's just a huge amount of data that we're dealing with. And to try to keep this smooth, we just ran into a lot of problems. Because as you can imagine, WPF has to decode the image files, so they're JPEG. So it has to decode the image files, transfer those into video memory, and do this over and over and over. So we came across a couple of tricks. One of them, and the one that really ended up saving us, is something I didn't know about actually before I started this project. There is a property. There's a static on a class called renderoptions dot. Josh?
Bitmap scaling quality.
Bitmap scan quality, is that what it is? Yeah. Scale quality. Anyways, you can set this to high or low. We do this trick. We wanted to keep it high. And what this basically does is it means that the decoding process will either use like a fast algorithm or a high quality algorithm. As we were zooming in, we found that throughout that animation it has to decode that JPEG multiple times because it's bringing it in at different sizes. What we found we could do is if we turned that, just for the animation, if we would set that property to low quality, it wasn't visible as you saw it because it's happening so fast, so you don't see the degradation. And then we can snap it back to high quality once we get up close. And this was the thing that prevented my heart attack, because we discovered this after we were fairly invested, because we were testing with smaller images. And then once I got the large images in there, I was like, man, what are we going to do? So anyway, that's something to know about. Another thing that we started doing is, we'll get to some controls that we use. There's a control called element snapshot that we use, though, that allows you to take a snapshot of the content. We did that prior to zooming too, and that made a big difference.
So something about the panning that I actually am calling this panning narrative. It's something that, obviously, when you're reading a comic book, comic authors actually design the comic, long, tall panels, short panels, wide panels, flowing panels, irregularly shaped panels. Any of that kind of way they've done that is an intentional, method of the way they communicate through this medium. Something that when we actually step into this panel animation, we're kind of like moving into a space that I think, the author or the artist might not have intended. So we wanted to actually build this in a way that we could actually put this in the hands of the artist. So Robbie's going to show how we actually create the panel narrative here.
Okay.
With the tool. Yeah,
so if you look at this, the problem that needs to be solved here is that we've got, if we go back to full-size page, let's see. Okay, so if we go back to full-size page, you can see there's panels here, and as we zoom in on those, like Nathan said, we wanted to put that decision of the boundaries, or how you actually tell that story, right? As you move into the different bits of content, we wanted to allow that to be something that anybody could do. As you can imagine, the actual data format for this is a big XML document. We didn't expect the artists who would be creating a comic book to be hand editing XML, especially at the level where they're like identifying regions on the page or whatever. That'd be a cumbersome process. So we realized very early on that in addition to needing a reader, we also needed a comic book creator. So let me show you that really quickly. Okay, so this is the comic book creator. I'll maximize this. So comic book creator has you choose a working directory. And that working directory should be the directory that contains whatever content it is, the images in this case, that you want to display or that you want to make up the pages. So I'll actually show you. If we come into assets right here, we've got this directory. So these are just image files. It's just a bunch of JPEGs. These are actually JPEGs that were delivered to us from the publisher. So now if I go into that directory, so it was assets and then 24 image files. And there's just a couple of them in here. But right now, so it generated thumbnails for us, so we can interact with the thumbnails, because like I said, the images are really big. So in fact, if you go back to the directory, you've got all the thumbnails in there now. And then as you go through these, you have the ability to actually choose one. So we'll find one with some interesting panels, maybe this one. And you can actually draw the regions directly on here. And so the idea is that this would allow the artist to make these decisions. And if say you wanted to have like some dramatic effect well, let's see, let's move this back down, make it a little bit bigger. Then, so we move this right here. So you wanted like dramatic emphasis on that bubble, and then you want to, after that, pan out and zoom to the entire frame. So there's actually a creative process involved in how you tell this story and how you navigate through the different panels. So we can add these real quick. I'll just finish up this page so then I can show you what actually happened. So the first thing to know is that if I close this now, you'll see that this little comicbook.xml file showed up. So we've actually created the XML file, so all of that is persisted. Now if we come back into Creator, we can open up that directory again. So that was under Assets, and it's 24 image files. And now all of our regions are still intact. The other thing is we built this is kind of cool. I was on the controls team, like I said, at Microsoft. When people started talking to us about user controls, I honestly just didn't get it. Now I would say that I'm in love with user controls. So we actually built the entire reading experience as a user control. And the thing that's really cool about doing that is it allows us to actually host the entire reader inside of Creator. So all I do is I click Show Preview, and now we've got the reading experience embedded right here inside of the application. So now if we go to that page, here, let me go back to single page view. So if we go into this page and now we start navigating through, you can see that those same regions which we just defined, including this one, are the, oh, by the way, you can see as we're going into the low quality scan mode or scaling mode. Anyway, you can see that the exact regions that we defined are what the reader is using in order to tell the story. So, and then when we're done, it'll zoom us back out to the page.
So one of the really cool things that Robbie actually hooked up is that all the animations are markup based. So we can actually have custom animations. The author can create their own animations. We can actually bind to a different duration for the experience. We can change the easing and the ease out of the animation.
So the intention is that if you're an artist and you've created the story, the motion through the panels might actually be a part of that story. And so if something, if it's quick paced and there's very little text, you might want to be able to quickly move through something. Or if it's slow and boring, I don't know, then you might want to have like a slower pace to the animations or whatever. You could, I don't know, you could jiggle something if something blew up or whatever. You have the ability to control that.
So reading is only one part of the project. I mean, we just realized that authoring the content, not just authoring the actual pages structure and the panel narrative, but actually authoring the actual bitmaps or any content that was going to make up the content themselves was a really important part. There's a ton of innovation in this space. There's people doing comic reader experiences all over, and they're doing all sorts of different stuff. They're using different paradigms for actual navigation, different kinds of flow. And then just native to the art is that there's just tons of ways of pulling this off. I mean, there's comics in chalk, there's comics in complete vector, like totally vector-based comics. We don't want to limit the artist to what kind of content they can actually show with the content. So we took advantage of that, and we enabled XAML support in our app. So any of the pages that you can see there could be a XAML element. What's great about that is that we can make a decision to say, okay, we're going to be Silverlight support, so we can write cross-platform reach comic reading experiences, as well as a rich, local, offlineable, collected experience, which I think is a really cool thing. Is you start feeling like you can collect these comics and integrate into the OS.
So you can imagine that because of the fidelity of the images, it might be that you want a reading experience where you actually download the images. I mean, this comic book is like 40 megabytes, right? So it might be that you'd pay money, or you would want to download the high fidelity version, or it might also be that you would want like an online reading experience. So that so the idea is that you could have like an online reader as well as an offline reader.
Right. So we wanted to try it out for ourselves. We didn't want to just make assumptions about the content creating experience. So we started talking about, okay, well, we're going to create some content. We actually wanted to say, what kind of things could you do with the since we're enabling XAML, how could we actually make blend and design and those tools actually plug into the content authoring experience? And so, honestly, it started out as a joke. I mean, we started brainstorming around, yeah, we could do a comic, and we could pretend to be superheroes. And pretty soon basically Ravi and I, we do a lot of talk about workflow. In the workflow, we have this, concept that, developers have the difficulty of working with designers. Designers have the difficulty of working with developers. And there's this person that we've been calling the integrators. We keep just changing this and keep changing what we think this means. But that person kind of gets talked about like a superhero. We're like, that person kind of comes in and saves these projects. And so that was where we kind of came up with this idea that we were going to become the identity man. And that's where you see these t-shirts all around. And it just, seriously, like when Robbie says Identity Mine is a company that, like, just, you know, how we went out and shopped this around, and they're a company of action. So
we have a logo, you'll notice.
Seriously, you know, I've got t-shirts. I'm not going to be happy until I have an action hero, just so you guys know. I want a little plastic action hero and movie rights. But, so I'm going to show you some of the, should we do extras first?
No, yeah, go ahead. Let's show them the comic.
Okay. So this is, switch that back over to here.
Is Jared Potter here? Oh, there he is. So Jared is our one of our artists in residence at Identity Mine. In fact, one of the things that we got most excited about is Jared has, in addition to being a great UI designer, in fact, he did a lot of the, or some of the stuff that you saw in the keynote today. He's also a great artist, and so he put this together. So this is the Identity Man. This is a limited edition. It's the first issue, issue number 1. So
if you can't tell, that's Robbie right there, and the good-looking one in the back is me without any eyes or anything. But so we'll jump into the reading experience here, and just like we saw with the 24 comic, this is just a really now. One thing is this is all totally tongue-in-cheek. So when you read the comic, just make sure you recognize that it's about how the identity men come in and save the day. So you'll get a chance to read the comic soon. I'm going to navigate into my comic, and I'm going to show you a feature that we built. What's really funny about this is if you actually read this, if you ever have a chance to have Jared, I need to actually, one of the things we built into this was this extras content. I'm going to actually try to get Jared to narrate this thing, because when Jared reads this, it's really funny. I mean, he's really thought through what the reading experience is. But when we navigate to this page right here, you can see we've just popped up a little extras thing. And this is something that I've been wanting to do forever. I've been wanting to get this rich content that you sync locally to have the concept and be able to be connected to the live content. And so, you know, if we're occasionally connected, we can be checking to find out what new content's available. So we can be actually assigning content, extras content on a per page level, per comic level, and a per panel level. Right now it's telling us that there's a piece of content in here that is extras related to this page. It's actually referring to this profile of Robbie, and so I'm going to pop this open. And it actually gives you an option. It's a little small here, but we have options to look at the original ink drawings and the storyboards for this contest with content, or we can actually see the interview with the artist. So I'm going to pop this up. And we didn't have sound hooked up, do we?
Oh, we do have sound hooked up.
We have sound hooked up.
Is computer audio up? Oh, maybe it's muted. Hold on. Let's pause this.
So I'll talk about this for a second while Robbie gets the sound working. This is actually Silverlight content hosted inside of WPF, which really for me is a really cool scenario. When I was trolling the comic authors and artists and writers, they're all producing their comics ahead of time and blogging about them ahead of time. And the only way you can actually get to the comic after they've blogged about it is to, you go and you see the mock-ups and the sketches of their content, and then you have to go buy the comic in print. So it's like once you've been hooked, once you know you want to read this comic because you've seen their storyboards, there's no way of getting to it. So the Silverlight content we're actually hosting online, and we're not getting any audio?
No, I think I had the wrong one.
Okay.
It doesn't have
final.
Okay.
So the Silverlight content is hosted online. So once you've seen the extras content and you want to get the comic, it should be a one-click application, click once experience. And vice versa, when you're reading the comic, you would get this. You get this dramatic music.
Hey, I'm Jared Potter, the Senior Creative Designer here at Identity Mine, and I am the artist that worked on the artwork for the Identity Mine comic. So one of the cool things we did, because we needed to have Robbie and Nathan be the heroes of the comic book, is we used the MacBook built-in cameras And because Robbie and Nathan weren't always in the office, we just had them take a bunch of pictures of themselves from all the different angles. Did a photo shoot basically over the internet, having them turn their head to the side, smile, get angry, make all these different facial gestures, and then send them all to me, zip them up, and send them to me. And then using that, I was able to create characters of them as comic book superheroes. And there's Nathan, and here we've got a good one of Robbie. There they are, coming at the camera. And then, of course, our cover of them looking nice and hardcore. This one was a lot of fun because I was looking at, we bought a whole bunch of comics, which was really fun. It's always fun when you can go to the store and buy comics for your work. So we went and bought a whole bunch of comics, looking for inspiration, going through all of them. And I think we were looking at like an old X-Men comic book, and there was a scene with like Wolverine with like this big explosion behind him, and you see the shadows coming out. And I was like, how cool would it be if we had Robbie and Nathan like that? So I just drew up this initial sketch and like kind of passed it around the office, and everyone was like, yeah. So Robbie's got the real standout, the glasses that everyone recognizes. So I put him right in front of Nathan, not to mean that he's more of a comic book looking guy, but it's just easy to notice the glasses and the stance and everything. So we finished up the cover with that.
So if you want to feel like a superhero, Identity Mine is a great place to work.
All right. Actually, not closing, Robbie. Alt F4. There we go. Okay. So if you can think about what kind of extras content, like one of the things Robbie and I have been talking about, and we're kind of excited about issue 2. Like, you know, we could actually post at the very end of this, at the last panel on the to be continued of our comic, we could say, you know, like, hey, we want ideas of what happens in the next issue, you know, or here's some suggestions. Are we going to fight, you know, Battleship Gray Man or cliche Gel Button Man or something like that? So just the ideas of rich content that you can actually apply to this is, you know, pretty fun. So now I'm going to talk about taking the XAML content to the next step. So here's some of the content. When Jared actually created the stuff, he created in Adobe Illustrator. I just grabbed his Illustrator files. Once he had the Adobe Illustrator content, he used Photoshop to paint it up and get it really, really hot looking. I grabbed his Illustrator files, so this is prior to the beautiful work that he did. But I grabbed those, brought them into design here, and then I exported them into a blend project. So really quick, I'm going to open up this project right here. I'm going to open it with blend. Inside that project, well, hey, we don't have to use the trial anymore. Woo. So here's that project. We exported out. And kind of a baked cake demo here. I've got some elements already put in.
This is the first time I've realized this, but that is me in XAML. That's amazing.
So there's an element that I've got in here. It's a little control that I'm going to set up some different backgrounds with. So I'm going to actually, you know, hide this one. So let's go to properties and visibility on this guy and set it to collapsed. And I'm going to take this element and I'm going to change the template on it. And I've got a couple resources that I put in there. So now we can start using any kind of content that you want. So if we were doing Silverlight, if we're doing Silverlight, we could use all the animation functionality in there. And if we're using WPFE, or WPF, we can start using 3D content. I'm going to show that in a second here. But here's an example of a different background cover. I'm going to edit control on this, edit the template. And then here's the timeline. So if I hit play, you can see we've got these little wavy rings going on. That's just one style, but the one I really liked that really kind of fit the style that Jared had created was this one. And this is actually a demo that's right in the SDK. All right. So what's done here is you've got two spheres with a material map to the spheres that have emissive blending on it, so you get this really cool glowing effect. So we now have that great glowing from behind like the original comic did. So I'm going to save this background, and I'm going to go into my pages folder here, and I'm just going to copy these pages, go into my comics, and just like Robbie was showing before, here's a page that's already been created. Here's the previews and some existing stuff. I'm just going to delete. Oops.
Oh, I'm sorry, my keys are.
I'm good. I'm good. Okay. So I'm just going to delete the first page, the one that we're replacing, and I'm just going to paste the new page in. So here's our page 1. I'm going to kick open the creator. I'm going to find that folder. And when it creates the comic, you can see that it's created the XAML content that we just created. And when we show the preview on this, you can see that we have cool animation in the background. So now we're actually going kind of that step farther with content using 3D, any interactivity. It's just like, basically, point is XAML breaks the limits of what people can do.
Nate put that together. That's pretty cool, right? And you can imagine how empowering this is to an artist, right? Like if you, now all of a sudden you have the ability to take what traditionally is very static content and make it, add additional thoughts or, tell a story in a different way by making it interactive or making it animated or, doing whatever you want to do. You actually really have a huge amount of flexibility there.
Let's see if there it goes. This is actually where we're using element snapshot to do some freezing of the content so that it can animate smoothly.
Well, so the last thing that we wanted to show you was, or talk to you about, is actually the process of creating this. So like I said, this was a kind of a fast-paced project, but it was also a really fun one, and I think it actually brings to light a lot of really interesting ideas about how it is that you actually create content and applications in WPF. So I'll talk to you about that just really quickly. So, if you were here at MIX last year, we talked about WPF a lot. Rob Relier had this great post when he was getting ready for his MIX talk, which was, what should my content be? Because I already kind of did the 101 talk. So I was thinking about that too. It's hard because there's a mixed group of people here, and we wanted to share thoughts and ideas that are actually relevant about how we built this. So this isn't 101. It's also not 201. It's maybe more like 102. It's like the second semester of WPF. So just a couple of thoughts about how it is that you can maybe some best practices for building apps with WPF. So this application had a number of problems that were kind of tough to solve. The biggest one, I think, is one that I mentioned earlier, which is the fact that we were dealing with really, really, really big images, and we're trying to move them around really, really quickly, right? In addition to that, though, it had a lot of the problems that any WPF application has, which is coordinating your UI with your data and then making that really compelling. So I want to talk about 3 things. First of these is data. Here, I'm just going to stand over here. So 3 lessons learned, 3 things that you can do to build an application that is, I guess, WPF. People always talk about how they want to do things the WPF way. Well, if there are 3 things that you can take away today about how to do things the WPF way, it's these 3 things. So the first of these is data. By the way, this content that I'm about to talk about is a very, very short version of content that Kevin Moore is going to cover in his talk on Friday. Is Kevin here? What? Oh, well, I don't see Kevin. But anyway, definitely check out this talk if this is interesting to you. I think Kevin will go into a lot more detail here, and this, I think, is really, really compelling stuff to think about. So the thing about data binding is, first of all, data binding is both fun and, as I mentioned here, it's also easy. In fact, I'll show you just how easy it is in a minute. As a developer, though, you have to think about a couple of things. And these are big words that are actually not hard to do. So the first of these is, so remember, iNotify property changed. And the second thing is iNotify collection changed. Pretty much any data in WPF is something that you can bind to. So you can bind to essentially any CLR object that has a property on it. In order to get that to continually tell you, though, that it's updated so that your bindings stay live, you need to implement these 2 interfaces. And it's not hard to do. Basically, it's just you have to fire an event whenever something changes. iNotify collection changed. Most of the work is already done for you if you use a class called observable collection. And there's a generic version of that called observable collection of T, or well, the generic version of observable collection. If you use that, if you use these two things, things will just pop for you. Oh, thanks. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is ponents. Ponents are similar to components in WPF. This is a term that I use. So the way I think about components is it allows you to take tasks which might normally be really hard and package them up and make them really easy. This, I think, is a critical part. Actually, all three of these are critical parts of the developer designer workflow. This in particular, though, is something that you can do as a developer to really enable the designers in your organization. And I'll show you how we did that in this application in just a second. And then, yeah, go ahead. And then this last piece of this idea of integrator, and there's Nate, the ultimate integrator. Now, one thing about an integrator is we've had a hard time defining exactly what this word is. We kind of know what it feels like to be an integrator. We've been doing a lot of work to try to figure out how to articulate it. I see Laurent is here. A lot of my most intense thinking about what an integrator is happened when Laurent came out and we did a training with him. He asked all kinds of great questions. And so I've spent, that was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we've spent a lot of time, or I've spent a lot of time since then, trying to figure out what it is that an integrator does. And I know what an integrator is and what he's not. I don't know that I've got a real succinct definition yet. One thing that I think is critical, though, is that an integrator is a coordinator. So that means that an integrator knows about what the developer is doing, and an integrator knows about what the designer is doing, and it's his job in many ways to bring those two people together. A lot of this is about having a plan, although it's not that he's a project manager. He's not scheduling tasks. He is aware of the technical considerations that both people need to think about. So you can go to the next one. Oh, you know, I don't know. Well, that's okay. Go back to the. Oh, okay, perfect. An integrator is also not an interaction designer, and I think this is a big misconception. Interaction design is something that has been happening for a really long time. It can happen on paper. Usability folks will tell you that some of the best interaction design actually happens on paper prior to actually building anything. A lot of times an interaction designer wouldn't be a good integrator because of the skills that he has. And a lot of times we call people with those skills, the people who kind of sit between a developer and a designer, we call those guys diviners. But that's not quite an integrator yet. Like I said, these are all things that an integrator might be, but I think here's some adjectives that work for me. So communicator. So one thing is a great integrator is somebody who can communicate with two people, and Nate is a classic example of this. He is also a great delegator, by the way, if you ever have a chance to work with him. And I mean that in a really positive way, not the way it sounded. Nate does a great job of getting the right people to do the right job. And I think that makes him a great integrator. Another thing is he's a visionary. He's a person who knows where the project should hopefully end up. And somebody who's willing to drive it to that, right? Another thing that an integrator is a technical XAML guy. And this is a skill set that is hard to define, but it's somebody who understands how to work in XAML, understands how to create a compelling design in XAML, but also understands XAML at a technical level so that he can coordinate with what it is that the developer is doing. So with those three things,
Switch?
Yeah, switch. So those three things, I think you can be pretty successful in building an application and actually making the process of assembly really a straightforward one. So what I wanted to do really quickly, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I wanted to show you how, by following those principles, by having a solid data model that supports data binding, by using components, and then also by having a plan, the kind of plan that an integrator would put together or coordinate, you can actually create really rich functionality very quickly, and how it's really empowering, especially to a designer. So let me show you. What we're going to do is create a kind of a simplified version of the comic reader, but do it in Blend. So I'm just going to open up Blend here. I guess we've already got a project here, so close this one. And we'll just create a new project. So this is totally from scratch. It's called Untitled 5. So there's not a lot of room here. But so the first thing I want to do is we'll just give this a dark background. This goes to Nate's simplicity point. We'll keep the content to be something that pops. So the first thing I want to do is illustrate the data. So we constructed our data object in a way that it does support data binding, so it supports those two interfaces that I talked about. When you do that, Blend actually gives you a really great workflow. So I've also created the data in a separate project, and that gives me the ability to actually just add this data in as a reference. So I've got this assembly called comic book data, and this is where all of the data objects are defined. So I can add that to my project, and then in Blend I can just say add a CLR object as a data source. So you can see in here I've got this namespace called comic book data. And in here, wait, where's comic book? Oh, right there. So now I'm going to add a comic book object into the application. So at this point, my application knows about comic books, right? It's got a comic book object associated with it. Now watch, what I want to show you is how easy this is, if you've built your data right, how easy it is for a designer or an integrator to take that deliverable and use it inside of Blend. So we can just, so you can see there's a bunch of properties right here. So here's my comic book. We've got a bunch of properties like base folder, file name, issue, pages. These are all the properties that are defined on that object. If I pick up file name and drag that into the scene, I can choose the control that I want to bind that to, because it knows I need to create a new control. So I'm going to choose a text box. And then it lets me define some parameters of how that binding happens. So I know I've got the file name property, and I'm going to bind that to the text box. The next thing it's saying, though, is what property on the text box should be bound to the file name. So I'm just going to choose this field text. I also want to say, though, that this is a two-way binding, because I want the user to be able to type into this text box and have that update the comic object, which will result in loading the comic book. Okay, so we do that. Let's kind of park this up at the top and make this a little more reasonable looking text box. Now the next thing I want to do is I've got this associated with the comic book, I've got a bunch of pages. So I need to get those pages into the application, and this will give us that navigation strip down at the bottom of the app. So you can see I've got pages, and it's telling me that that's an array. So that means it's something that will be good in the list box because there's multiple items in there. So I can pick that up, drag that in, and now I do the same thing. I tell it I want that to be a list box. Want to bind that to the item source, and so we can hit OK there. Now when I do that, it's also saying, what do you want the comic book objects to look like? So it knows it's got a list box, and it's going to fill it up with comic books, right? So now I have a chance to define the item template property, which is how you define what each page inside of that list box is going to look like. So I'm going to do that. First of all, let's clear all of these, and then we'll just make the container for it a grid. And then let's come down to this property, let's see, preview source path. And so we want to have an image in there, and this is saying let's bind the preview source path property on the comic page object, this going over your head, to the source property on the image. Does that make sense? So we're going to create an image. That'll be the data template. We're going to bind the source property on the image to the preview source path property on the comic page. Okay. Doesn't look like anything happened, but a whole lot of work was just done for me. And you can see that because if I click on this and say edit other templates, I can come and say edit the item template, and you'll actually see that image. So if we come in here, well, you won't see the image, but you'll see something that represents the image. There's no image there yet because it's not live. But you'll notice that right here, I've got it. Can you guys read that? That says image right there. So you can see that in the template, I've got this image. What I want to do real quickly on that image is set the width. We'll make that 75, and then we'll keep the height as auto. And that'll make sure that we've got some room to display our images into. So now we can pop back up out of that. Let's see. And then the one other thing that you can do in a list box or any control like a list box, any items control, is you can change the actual panel that it's using internally. So normally when you think of a list box, it's a bunch of items that go down like that, right? That's a stack panel. And stack panel has an orientation property that's sending things down vertically. So the value for orientation would be vertical. You can change that, though, to make it so that it'll stack them horizontally. Or actually, we could change the panel altogether. What I want to do, though, is I'm going to come back into the list box and right-click on that. We'll say, now we want to edit the layout of items. So to do that, I'm going to create a new resource. Okay, so in here you can see that I've got a bunch of items. So this is my stack panel, and it's adding a whole bunch of items. But you can see that they're being laid out vertically. We can change this, changing this to horizontal, the orientation property to be horizontal. And now you can see that they're being laid out horizontally. So let's bump out of that. And now we'll park this list box kind of down at the bottom where we saw it before. And then just to kind of make it look nice, we'll set some properties on it. We'll set the background property to be null and also the border brush. Okay, so now if I run this, actually before I do that, I need to get a comic. So let's come into comics. We'll take a look at the identity men comic. So the comic file is this file, comicbook.xml. So I'm going to need that so I can give that to the text box to get things up and running. Okay, so now if we run this, Okay, paste that in there. And you can see that it immediately, when we paste that in there, the binding set the file name property on the comic book object. And that had the effect of inflating that comic book object. It loaded all of the comics, and then it populated our list box. So now we've got a list box full of these little preview images, right? So you can see by how, following data binding principles, I was able to make it really easy for somebody to, like I said, assemble this application, right? Okay, so show you one other thing really quickly. Let's grab a content control. I don't know if I've got one of those handy. So, okay, so grab a content control, and this is where we'll display like the large version of the page. So let's just draw that right there. Might be overlapping the list box, but that's okay. So now content control has a property called content, and we want this to be the content of our page. So I can bind this. Now this is a different kind of data binding. Before, all of the data binding that I was doing was data binding to my data object, right, to the source. Now I want to data bind to the list box itself. So let's see. So if we can find that list box, and now list box has a property on it called selected item, so we'll use that. And now the selected item that it's going to give me is a page object, right? So it's going to go to the list box, it's going to get whatever is selected, which will be a page object. And then I want to use the property on that called page content for my content control. So now if we run this, paste this in there again. Now if I click on these, you can see that we've got this comic popping up. Oh, wow. And there's the XAML. Okay, so that sort of covers the things at the data level. The next thing that I talked about, though, that you can do is you can empower the designers in your organization by giving them controls. And over the course of our history, we've built a lot of controls at Identity Mind, as you can imagine. We've done a bunch of projects. And as we've done that, we've learned a lot about creating controls. And we've also found that there's this set of controls that we use over and over and over. And in fact, we're going to be giving you one of these. Put it in my pocket.
You have the card.
Yeah, I'm looking for, okay. So make sure you pick up one of these today. We've bundled up this set of controls that we found to be the most useful. And we're making those available to you. So we have a package of controls called Blendables Essentials. We're selling those, but for a limited time, there's a downloadable version that you can get and you can play with. It's a trial version. If you pick up this card, then there's a number on the back. You can use this to get access to a version of these that you can play with. So I want to show you how we were able to use one of those controls in a really, really powerful way to very, very easily enable the zooming capability that you saw. So one of the controls, and we use this all the time, it's called Zoombox. Oh, yeah. Oh, is Jonathan here? Jonathan is the inventor of Zoombox. So let me show you. So first, in order to use those controls, we need to bring them in. And again, we do that by adding a reference to the assembly where those controls are defined. The really cool thing about that, though, is Blend is smart enough to look at the assemblies that you've imported into the application and find the custom controls that are in them. So now if I come over here to the controls library again, and I click on custom controls, all the controls that we just added, including Zoombox, just showed up. So I'm going to add a Zoombox to my application, like that. And then I will actually take this content control and we'll just drag that into the Zoombox. And then I'm going to do one other thing on that content control, which is give it a width of 1,000 pixels. And that's just by convention. When we stored the zooming information, we did so on the assumption that the content would be 1,000 pixels wide. So then we'll make this auto. So let me just show you what we got with that. So now when we run this, let's paste this in. So now when I select one of these, you can see that the comic is still showing up, but because it's in a Zoombox, I actually have the ability to do the zooming within it. So, and this is a control, like I said, that you can download, you can play with. I think it's super useful, and there's a number of other controls like this in the pack that are really useful. So you can pick this up and you can move around. It's also got some cool interaction. So I could, like, if I really wanted to read that, carefully, I could zoom in on that. We realized, though, that we needed a way to be able to store this and then hook that back up to the view box. And so one of the properties that we have on Zoombox. One of the properties that we have on Zoombox is called View Stack Source. This is a way for you to, so Zoombox will actually keep track of the navigation as you zoom through, through the content. If you set the view stack source property, it allows you to actually have a store for that, so you can actually control it. And so one thing we can do is we can come into the Zoom box, find that property, so it's view stack source, and then we can bind this again to a property on our page, on our comic book page. Create a data binding. Again, we want to go to the list box because we want to be working with whatever is currently selected. And here we're going to use selected item dot, and the name of the property is views. So we can hit finish. So now if I run this, we'll do this in full screen this time. Okay, so now if I click on these, you'll notice that I'm getting that navigation. If I come over here, though, I can actually use the, I'm not sure why I didn't, I'm using the wrong comic. This one doesn't have it. It was Identity Mine Final, is that the one? Yeah. All right, let me make sure I've got the right, the comic I'm using doesn't actually have any of that information stored in it, so we need to go get a different comic. Okay, so this one's got it. Okay, so now if we come in here, paste that value in there. Okay, so now we've got our comic book, and hopefully this has the, I'm not sure what's going on, guys. Let me try one other comic. Let's start over. I know 24's got it, so we'll do this one. Okay, so now choose a comic page. We got our little navigation history, and you can see that it's that just by doing that, we now have the ability to do those panel-by-panel navigations. So the point that I wanted to illustrate, though, is that if you think about your WPF application this way, think about it as the data driving the UI, having a strong data model, something that supports those two, that supports WPF data binding, and then finally, if you think about taking complex problems and then breaking them down into smaller problems that you then compose into solutions, then I think you'll be really successful as you approach your applications. And I also think that you'll discover that the workflow between developers and designers gets a lot easier. So I think with that, the last thing, we have one other big announcement.
You want to?
Yeah, go for it.
So on the way out, we're handing out issue 1 of Identity Men. Where's Jared? And you want to talk about the source at all, or what?
About what?
About your sample.
Oh yeah. So we will make the sample. We'll pretty it up, make a nicer looking version of the sample, and we will make that available to you to download so that you can try out blendables. Don't stick with just with the Zoombox though. Zoombox is an awesome control. There's a number of other awesome controls in there. Timeline panel is my personal favorite. It's my contribution to the pack. There's also some great 3D visualization that you can do in there. There's a number of great controls in there. You can pick up a flyer on your way out. So don't forget, get your card, get the flyer about blendables, download the source to this sample. We'll make that available in the next couple of days. And make sure you get your comic book. And I think with that, thanks very much. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for listening to us talk about comics.